Timber Falls, Oregon, 2025. The mist clung to the pine forests like a shroud, and the scent of sawdust hung thick in the chilly morning air. Jake Lawson, a man of 32, wiped the sweat and dirt from his brow as he prepared his chainsaw for the day's work. He had been a lumberjack all his life, ordinary, hard-working, and uncomplaining. That morning, the familiar hum of the chainsaw shattered as it groaned and died. Jake tried again. Nothing. Smoke curled from the engine like a silent warning. His boss, Harold Crane, arrived in his black pickup truck, the tires crunching over gravel, and leaned against the hood, arms crossed. Harold was a man built more for arrogance than for labor, his expensive boots and designer jacket a clear insult to the forest's rugged truth. "Well, well, Jake," Harold sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Looks like your incompetence has finally caught up with you." Jake swallowed the lump in his throat. "It just broke on its own, sir. I didn't—" "Don't make excuses," Harold cut him off. "You'll pay for it. The chainsaw isn't cheap." Jake felt his stomach knot. The chainsaw was $1,200, an impossible sum for a man who earned just enough to keep the roof over his mother's head. He had been sending her the little he could, barely enough to cover her medications. He clenched his fists, muttering to himself, "As Martin Luther King once said, the time is always right to do what is right. But right now, I can't even do anything for myself." Before he could argue further, his phone buzzed. It was a call from his sister. Her voice trembled. "Jake, it's Mom. The doctors, they say she needs surgery. She doesn't have much time." Jake's chest tightened. He thought of his mother lying in the hospital, the bills stacking higher than the mountains surrounding Timber Falls, and the doctors, who always seemed to love money more than patience, pressing for immediate payment. He had nothing. The forest around him felt colder, emptier, and the weight of injustice pressed down on him. But deep in his heart, Jake refused to bow. Something told him that what seemed like misfortune might yet hide a different truth. Jake walked home through the dense forest, the chainsaw's smoke still lingering in the morning air. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of the world had settled onto his shoulders. His mother's face flashed in his mind, frail, pale, and trusting him to find a way. At home, the small, worn cabin seemed to shrink around him. His mother, Margaret, sat by the window, her knitting abandoned on her lap. "Jake," she whispered, noticing the despair in his eyes. "Is something wrong?" He hesitated. How could he tell her that the very tool that fed their lives had betrayed him? That Harold, his boss, would demand he pay $1,200 he didn't have? And that the doctors, those merciless guardians of the hospital bills, wouldn't even look at her without cash in hand? Jake sank into a chair. "Mom, the chainsaw broke. I have to pay for it, but I don't have the money." Her hands trembled as she reached for his. "Jake, the hospital called. They say I need surgery immediately. I don't know how we'll afford it." Jake clenched his fists, a storm of anger and helplessness raging inside him. He thought of Harold, smug and narcissistic, who spent his life belittling everyone under him, yet demanded the impossible from his workers. "Some men," Jake muttered, "live to crush others so they can feel tall. Nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." He recalled, quoting Voltaire, but this time it was Harold he had in mind. As the sun sank behind the pine trees, Jake's mind raced. Borrowing money wasn't an option. The banks would never give a loan to a man barely scraping by. The neighbors were struggling too. And yet, he refused to surrender. Somewhere, there had to be a way to turn this tide. That evening, as darkness swallowed Timber Falls, a shadow appeared at his door, a stranger with a calm, knowing smile. "Jake Lawson?" the man asked. I hear you need help, and I know how to get it. Jake looked at him warily. Who are you? My name is Elias, the stranger said. I've seen injustice like yours before. And sometimes, the world gives you a chance to fight back and make things right. Jake's heart quickened. Could this be the answer? The path to saving his mother, and finally standing up to Harold? Jake sat on the edge of his worn couch, his hands clasped tightly. Elias leaned against the doorway, his shadow stretching across the cabin floor. The fire flickered in the small hearth, casting dancing patterns on the walls, as though nature itself was listening. I know what you're thinking, Elias began, his voice calm but edged with a quiet fury. You've been wronged by the world, and you're drowning in it. Jake nodded slowly. Yes, but how do you know? Elias smiled faintly. Because I've lived it. When I was your age, my father was crushed under debt he didn't create. A greedy banker demanded payment for a loan my family never agreed to, and my mother, your mother's mirror, in a way, suffered because of it. The doctors, the lawyers, the so-called pillars of society, they all wanted one thing, money. Nothing else mattered. He paused, letting the words sink. I lost years to that injustice. I worked jobs that barely kept me alive, while the people who caused the pain laughed and prospered. I swore I'd never let anyone else suffer in silence if I could help it. Jake leaned forward. And you help people now? Yes, Elias said, eyes burning with a mixture of pain and determination. But it's not charity. It's justice. Life is full of unfairness. You've been handed hardship, broken tools, demanding bosses, greedy doctors. But sometimes, those moments are not just accidents. They are opportunities to see the truth, to act, and to fight back. Jake felt a spark of hope, fragile but real. Do you think I can do it? I can save my mom and stand up to Harold? Elias's lips curved into a sharp, confident smile. It won't be easy. You will fight, and you will risk. But remember this, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, he said, quoting Martin Luther King. And sometimes, the first step toward justice is simply refusing to accept your helplessness. Jake felt a swell of determination. For the first time since the chainsaw broke, he imagined a path, not just to survival, but to reclaiming his life and dignity. Elias extended a hand. Tomorrow we start. I'll show you a way to earn what you need, to save your mother, and to confront Harold for what he's done. But you must be ready. This path is full of danger, and the world will test you at every turn. Jake took the hand, gripping it with strength he didn't know he had. The fire crackled, the shadows shifted, and in the stillness of Timber Falls, a quiet promise was made. Injustice would meet its reckoning. The next morning, the forest was bathed in the soft pink light of dawn. Jake followed Elias along a narrow dirt path, the scent of pine fresh and biting in the cool air. The stranger's calm demeanor made Jake feel both nervous and hopeful. You have to understand something, Elias said as they walked. Life doesn't hand you fairness. You can't wait for help to fall into your lap. You have to take it, and sometimes you have to fight for it. Jake nodded. I understand. But how will I earn enough for Mom's surgery? I don't even have the chainsaw to work anymore. Elias stopped and faced him. We'll use what you do have, your strength, your mind, and your determination. Money isn't always earned through tools or luck. Sometimes it's earned through cleverness and courage. They reached a clearing where Elias gestured to a small, old shed. Inside, a few simple machines and wooden crates were stacked neatly. Here, he said, you'll start learning a different kind of work, one that doesn't belong to Harold. Work that pays directly, fairly, and quickly. Jake raised an eyebrow. And this, will it really be enough for Mom? Elias smiled grimly. It will be enough if you do it right. But remember, justice is not just about money. It's about standing tall when the world tries to crush you. As I learned the hard way, sometimes the people who seem untouchable are only waiting for someone brave enough to challenge them. Jake rolled up his sleeves, feeling a fire ignite inside him. Then I'm ready. Whatever it takes. Elias clapped him on the shoulder. Good. You're ready for more than just work. You're ready for the reckoning that comes when injustice is confronted. Hours passed, and Jake's muscles ached in ways they hadn't in years, but each crate moved and each task completed gave him hope. He thought of his mother, of the doctors demanding money, and of Harold smirking in his black pickup. Every strike, every lift, every drop of sweat felt like a small victory, proof that he could fight back. By the end of the day, Elias handed him a small pouch of cash. "This is yours," he said. "Earned honestly and enough to start helping your mother. But remember, the battle isn't over. Harold will notice soon, and he won't let things go quietly." Jake clutched the pouch like a lifeline. For the first time in weeks, he felt hope, not just for survival, but for justice. And somewhere deep in him, a plan was beginning to form. Harold had underestimated him. That mistake would cost Harold dearly. By the following morning, Timber Falls was alive with the sound of the forest, birds calling, leaves rustling, and distant chainsaws buzzing. But Jake wasn't thinking about nature. He was thinking about Harold. Elias had given him a plan. A small, clever maneuver to reclaim what Harold had taken from him without facing immediate retaliation. Jake wasn't ready to confront him directly, yet, but the seed of revenge had been planted. At the lumber yard, Harold was his usual self, striding among the workers like a king among peasants. His designer boots crunched over the gravel, his jacket impossibly clean, his nose tilted in the air. "Jake," he barked, "have you figured out how you're going to pay for that chainsaw yet?" Jake swallowed his fear, but didn't respond. Instead, he quietly set to work, working smarter than the other men, noticing every mismanaged log, every misplaced order, and every wasteful mistake Harold ignored. By noon, Jake had quietly corrected errors that had been costing the company hundreds of dollars a week, errors Harold didn't even know existed. When Harold finally noticed, he was furious. "What are you doing? Who told you to touch that?" Harold shouted, his face red with anger. Jake met his gaze steadily. "I'm making things right, sir. If you don't care about the waste, I will." Harold's face twisted with fury. "You insolent!" Elias's words echoed in Jake's mind. Sometimes, the people who seem untouchable are only waiting for someone brave enough to challenge them. And Jake realized something important. This wasn't just about chainsaws, or bills, or even his mother. This was about standing up to a man who thrived on crushing others, about proving that one person could disrupt injustice with determination and cunning. That night, Jake returned home, exhausted but exhilarated. His mother noticed the change in him. "You seem different, Jake," she said softly. "I am, Mom," he replied, a faint smile breaking through. "I'm learning that even when the world seems unfair, sometimes you just need to be smarter, stronger, and braver than the ones who think they own everything." For the first time, he felt a flicker of control, a sense that injustice, no matter how cruel, could be met with strategy, patience, and courage. The next morning, Jake and Elias returned to the clearing, the crisp air sharp with the scent of pine. Today, Elias had promised, would mark a turning point. "You're ready," Elias said. "What you earned today could be enough to start your mother's treatment. But remember, don't just work for money. Work for justice. Every step you take now is a step against those who would exploit the weak." Jake nodded, determination etched into his face. Hours passed as he moved with precision, strength, and focus. He learned to manipulate the machines in the shed, stacking timber with skill and efficiency that surprised even him. By midday, Elias handed him a ledger filled with orders, timber sold to independent buyers who trusted Elias's network. By sunset, Jake counted the earnings, more than $1,200. Enough to replace the broken chainsaw, enough to pay for part of his mother's medical care, and enough to prove that he didn't need Harold's approval to survive. Clutching the cash, Jake felt a surge of triumph. "Elias, I did it," he said, disbelief and pride mingling in his voice. "You did," Elias replied, a glint of pride in his eyes. "And that is only the beginning. You've earned more than money today. You've earned confidence. Never forget that." Meanwhile, at the lumber yard, Harold noticed the absence of mistakes and the efficient progress on the logs Jake had touched. His brow furrowed. "Something's off," he muttered to himself. "Jake, that boy's up to something. And it's not the work I told him to do." Harold's narcissism could not tolerate the idea of anyone outsmarting him. He began to watch Jake more closely, his anger simmering beneath a polished smile. That night, Jake gave his mother the money. Her eyes filled with tears, and she clutched his hands tightly. "Jake, I don't know how you... Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on me." Jake smiled, though exhaustion tugged at his body. "We're not done yet, Mom. We'll fix this. I'll make sure Harold, and everyone who thinks they can control us, learns a lesson." For the first time since the chainsaw broke, Jake felt like the tide had turned. Injustice had not vanished, but it had been challenged. The following morning, Jake returned to the lumber yard, the cash from his first independent earnings hidden safely in his coat. The air was thick with pine scent and the tension of unfinished work. Harold was already there, striding among the logs like a predator surveying his territory. "Jake!" Harold barked, his tone sharper than ever. "I hear you've been meddling with orders, correcting mistakes you had no right to touch. Explain yourself." Jake stood his ground, feeling the fire Elias had kindled in him burn bright. "I'm making things right, sir. I'm ensuring the work gets done properly. That's my job." Harold's eyes narrowed, rage and disbelief fighting for dominance. "Your job? Your job is to obey me, not act like you know better than your superior." Jake took a deep breath. "Maybe I didn't know better before, but I do now. And I've learned something else. Injustice doesn't disappear just because someone wears a fancy jacket or drives a black pickup. People like you, they only respect strength and fairness." Harold laughed, a cold, venomous sound. "Strength? Fairness? You're just a lumberjack, boy. You don't have the power to challenge me. You don't even have the money to fix the chainsaw you broke." Jake felt the memory of the cash in his coat, the earnings that had come from hard work, strategy, and Elias's guidance, strengthen his resolve. "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but I have enough to keep my mother alive. And sometimes, that's more power than a man like you will ever understand." For the first time, Harold hesitated. His mind raced, calculating. No one had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever defied him with confidence. "You're playing with fire, Jake," Harold spat. "Don't think I'll let this go. I own this yard, and I—" Jake cut him off. "You don't own my life. You don't own my family. And Harold, sometimes the ones who think they're untouchable are the easiest to topple." Harold's jaw tightened. He realized, for the first time, that Jake had changed. The boy who once trembled at the chainsaw's cost now had a plan, allies, and the courage to fight. As Harold stormed away, muttering threats under his breath, Jake felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. He had crossed the first line. The battle with Harold had begun, but this time Jake wasn't alone, and he wasn't powerless. That evening, Elias smiled at him. "Good work today," he said. Remember, courage is contagious. And when injustice meets preparation, it rarely wins. Jake nodded, thinking of his mother, of Harold, and of the path ahead. The fight had only just begun, but for the first time, he felt like he could win. Days passed, and Jake worked tirelessly under Elias's guidance. Each morning, he left the cabin with determination. Each evening he returned with the fruits of his labor, earnings that slowly stacked toward his mother's surgery. But Jake knew that money alone would not be enough. Harold's arrogance and cruelty needed to be addressed if he was ever to reclaim his dignity fully. Elias had taught him subtle ways to undermine Harold without drawing immediate suspicion. Jake began by noticing the inefficiencies the boss ignored: logs stacked incorrectly, orders misfiled, safety hazards overlooked. Quietly, he corrected them, often leaving behind evidence that the yard could operate better without Harold's interference. One afternoon, Harold stormed over, his face red with fury. "Why are the shipments ahead of schedule? Why is inventory accurate for once?" he demanded, glancing around for a scapegoat. Jake met his gaze calmly. "Because the work needed doing, sir. I made sure it happened." Harold's narcissistic mind struggled to process this. No one had ever done anything without his permission. He clenched his fists, his teeth gritted. "You think you're smarter than me, boy?" Jake shook his head. "I'm just doing what's right. Sometimes, the right thing doesn't need approval from someone who only cares about power and money." Harold flinched at the words, but no one else in the yard dared to speak. The workers watched silently, sensing a shift in the balance of authority. Jake's quiet rebellion was contagious. That evening, Elias handed Jake another bundle of orders and a small notebook filled with new opportunities. "The money you earn now," he said, "will cover your mother's treatment completely. But more importantly, you're learning something priceless. The world may be unfair, but injustice can be exposed, corrected, and even turned against those who perpetuate it." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on him. He thought of his mother's fragile hands and the doctors who demanded cash before care, and he realized something: injustice is only powerful if you let it be. By the end of the week, Jake had earned enough for his mother's surgery. The moment felt surreal: months of struggle, humiliation, and fear reduced to a tangible victory. But he knew the real battle was far from over. Harold was watching, angry and suspicious, and Jake's quiet victories had painted a target on his back. That night, as he handed the money to his mother, she held him tightly, whispering, "Jake, you've done more than save me. You've shown me courage I never imagined." Jake smiled, a mixture of relief and determination in his eyes. "This is just the beginning, Mom. The world tried to break us, but now we're fighting back." The morning sun poured through the small hospital window as Jake sat beside his mother, Margaret, gripping her hand tightly. The hum of machines and distant footsteps reminded him of how fragile life could be. But today, thanks to the money he had earned, she would get the care she needed. The doctors, always meticulous when money was involved, took one look at the payment Jake handed them and nodded curtly, already counting the bills with practiced efficiency. "She'll have the surgery today," one of them said. "We'll do everything we can, assuming payment is secured." Jake clenched his jaw, remembering Elias's words. "The world may be unfair, but injustice can be exposed, corrected, and even turned against those who perpetuate it." He felt a surge of gratitude that he had managed to turn his small victories into something tangible for his mother. Hours later, the surgery was complete. Margaret opened her eyes, weak but alive, and whispered, "Jake, you saved me." Tears streamed down her face, and Jake felt a weight lift from his chest, a mix of relief, love, and triumph. But the calm was short-lived. Back in Timber Falls, Harold had caught wind of Jake's independent earnings and the smooth completion of orders at the lumber yard. His pride, fragile and inflated, had been wounded. He paced in his office, muttering under his breath. "That boy, he thinks he can defy me. He's just a lumberjack, yet he's making moves behind my back. I'll show him the cost of disobedience. Nobody undermines Harold Crane and gets away with it." Meanwhile, Jake returned home that evening, exhausted but triumphant, unaware that Harold was already plotting his next move. For now, the injustice that had seemed insurmountable had been challenged, and for the first time, Jake felt the taste of real power. Elias met him at the cabin, a shadow of a smile on his face. "The surgery is done. Your mother is safe. But remember, Jake, victory is fragile. Those who cling to power rarely give it up willingly. Harold won't let this pass quietly." Jake nodded, determination burning in his eyes. "I'm ready. I've faced worse than Harold, and I won't let him take away what we've earned." That night, the wind whispered through Timber Falls like a warning. The battle for justice was far from over, but Jake had survived the first strike, and the taste of victory was intoxicating. The following morning, Timber Falls was unusually silent, as if the forest itself sensed the brewing storm. Jake arrived at the lumber yard, expecting another day of work, only to find Harold standing in the middle of the yard, a cruel smirk painted across his face. "Jake!" Harold barked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the morning mist. "I hope you're proud of yourself. Making decisions behind my back, taking orders, earning money independently. You've gone too far." Jake straightened, meeting Harold's gaze. "I'm just doing my job better, sir. Nothing more." Harold's laugh was cold and cutting. "Better? Don't make me laugh. You've been meddling in business that doesn't belong to you. I'm shutting you down. Effective immediately, you're suspended. No pay. And I'll make sure everyone knows you're incapable of following simple instructions." The workers murmured, unease rippling through the yard. Harold thrived on fear, and for a moment, Jake could feel the old anxiety creep back, but he pushed it down. Elias's words echoed in his mind. "Those who seem untouchable are only waiting for someone brave enough to challenge them." Jake squared his shoulders. "Harold, you can try to intimidate me, but your threats won't undo what's already been done. I've earned my mother's surgery. I've earned respect here, and I won't let your fear or arrogance change that." Harold's eyes narrowed, rage and disbelief fighting for dominance. "You insolent!" Before he could finish, Jake calmly showed him a stack of receipts from his independent work, the timber sold through Elias's network, the cash that had gone directly to the hospital, and the improvements he had quietly made to the yard. The proof of his initiative was undeniable. For a brief, shocking moment, Harold faltered. No one had ever confronted him with evidence, let alone with confidence. His jaw tightened, and his eyes darted around the yard, realizing that his authority was slipping through his fingers. Jake walked away, chest tight but unbroken. Outside, Elias waited with a small nod. "Good. You've shown strength. But now Harold knows you won't be passive. Expect his next move. And be ready." That night, Jake returned to his mother, holding her hand with quiet resolve. "We're safe for now, Mom," he whispered. "But the fight isn't over. Harold may strike again, but I'll be ready." Outside, the wind rustled the pine needles, whispering through Timber Falls like a prelude to the storm that was coming. The following evening, Jake and Elias sat in the small cabin, a single lamp casting long shadows across the walls. The forest outside was quiet, but inside, a storm of strategy and determination was brewing. "Harold's pride will be his weakness," Elias said, spreading a map of the lumber yard across the table. "He believes he controls everything, but his arrogance blinds him to subtle changes, and that's where we strike." Jake leaned over the map, studying the yard and the flow of work. "So we make him think he's still in control?" Elias nodded. "Exactly. We let him see what he wants to see, while quietly shifting the yard's efficiency, correcting mistakes, and building trust with the other workers. Harold will underestimate you, and that's when the real work begins. Jake's jaw tightened. And the money? That's part of it, Elias said. The more independent you are, the less Harold can manipulate you. Every penny you earn through your own efforts strengthens your position and ensures your mother's safety. But the final victory, that will come from intelligence, patience, and courage. Jake thought of the chainsaw that had broken, of the bills piling up at the hospital, and of Harold's cruel smirk when he thought Jake was powerless. Never again, he vowed silently. By the next morning, Jake had a renewed energy. He moved through the yard with purpose, subtly implementing Elias's strategies, building momentum, and laying the foundation for the confrontation that would finally expose Harold for the narcissistic tyrant he truly was. For the first time, Jake realized the world had tested him, crushed him, and mocked him, but it had also prepared him. And soon, Harold would learn that injustice is never permanent when the right person refuses to bow. By midweek, Timber Falls lumber yard hummed with quiet efficiency. Logs were stacked perfectly, orders were ahead of schedule, and the workers, once fearful of Harold, began glancing at Jake with newfound respect. Harold, unaware of the subtle changes, stormed through the yard one afternoon. "Jake!" he barked, slamming his hands on a pile of timber. "I don't understand. The shipments are perfect, inventory is accurate, and yet something feels off. Are you interfering again?" Jake met his gaze calmly. "I'm just doing what's right. Sometimes, the right thing doesn't need approval from someone who only cares about power and money." Harold's face twisted with frustration. "Fixing mistakes? Without permission? You insolent boy! Before he could finish, a worker stepped forward, timid but resolute. "Sir, Jake's right. The yard has been running smoothly because of his methods. We're more productive, and fewer accidents happen now." Harold's narcissistic mind recoiled. Never before had a worker, not even his own supervisors, spoken against him. His eyes flickered with anger and disbelief. He was losing control, yet the more he tried to assert it, the more the yard operated independently of him. Outside, Jake's plan, guided by Elias, unfolded like clockwork. Each improvement he made, each order he completed efficiently, weakened Harold's perceived authority. The narcissist's image of power began to crack. Later that evening, Elias placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Do you feel it?" he asked quietly. "The tide is turning. Harold thinks he's untouchable, but every move you make chips away at his arrogance. Soon, he won't know how to respond without revealing his true nature." Jake nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I can feel it. All this, it's working. Harold's power isn't real. It's only a mask. And once that mask falls, everyone will see him for what he really is." Elias's eyes gleamed. "Exactly. And remember, Jake, the real victory isn't just seeing him humiliated. It's protecting the people who rely on you, and proving that justice can exist, even in a place built on greed and fear." As Jake returned to his cabin that night, the forest seemed quieter, almost watchful. The chainsaw that had once symbolized his despair now felt like a memory of the fire that had fueled his rise. The injustice that had crushed him was no longer unchallenged. For the first time, he slept knowing that Harold's days of unchecked arrogance were numbered, and that the true battle for justice was about to begin. By the following morning, Harold's facade of control was cracking. He had tried to assert authority, intimidate the workers, and blame Jake for every decision, but nothing worked. The yard ran like clockwork, independent of him, and the employees no longer feared his wrath. They respected Jake. Harold slammed his hands on his polished desk, muttering to himself. How is this possible? That boy, he's undermined me without anyone noticing. Every move I make only strengthens him. I can't let this continue." Fueled by a toxic mix of narcissism and desperation, Harold devised a reckless plan. He decided to cut Jake's work hours, cancel his pay, and even threaten termination publicly in front of the entire crew. His goal was to intimidate Jake back into submission. That afternoon, Harold called a meeting in the yard. "Everyone," he barked. "Effective immediately, Jake Lawson is suspended. He will no longer touch the orders, the logs, or the shipments until I say so. Consider this a warning. Anyone who supports him will face consequences as well." The workers exchanged uneasy glances, but Jake remained calm. He knew this was Harold's panic talking. The mask of confidence had slipped. Elias, who had been watching from the edge of the yard, whispered to Jake, "This is exactly what we expected. Harold can't tolerate being exposed. Now he's showing his true face, reckless, angry, and predictable. This is the moment we've been preparing for." Jake stepped forward, voice steady and unwavering. "Harold, the yard doesn't belong to you. It belongs to everyone who works hard here, and your arrogance doesn't change that. I've earned my position by improving this place, not by disobeying. Your threats mean nothing to me, or to the people who rely on this yard." Harold's face turned crimson. "You insolent! Before he could continue, one of the senior workers stepped forward. "Sir, Jake's right. The yard is safer and more productive because of his methods. We won't return to chaos just because you're afraid of being challenged." Harold staggered back, fury and disbelief fighting in his eyes. For the first time, he realized he was not in control. Jake and the workers had shifted the balance. That night, Elias and Jake returned to the cabin. Elias placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "You've done more than earn money or protect your mother. You've exposed a tyrant. And now, it's only a matter of time before the world sees Harold for what he really is." Jake nodded, exhaustion and triumph mingling in his heart. "We've come so far, and yet the fight isn't over. But this time, I know we'll win." Outside, Timber Falls lay quiet under the stars. The tide had turned, and injustice was finally facing its reckoning. The following week, Timber Falls lumber yard buzzed with an energy Harold could no longer control. Orders were completed efficiently, safety improved, and the workers moved with confidence. Harold, however, became increasingly erratic. His threats grew louder, his face redder, and his patience thinner. Jake, guided by Elias, had anticipated this. Each small victory had been part of a larger plan, not just to protect his mother, but to expose Harold's narcissism and abuse. And now, the moment had come. During a busy afternoon, Harold stormed into the yard, intending to publicly humiliate Jake once more. "Everyone, gather round," he shouted. "Jake Lawson will." Before he could finish, Jake calmly stepped forward, holding a folder of records. Receipts of independent work, sales through Elias's network, and documented improvements to the yard. "This is everything I've accomplished while following proper procedure," Jake said steadily. "The yard is running better than ever, the workers are safer, and my mother is alive because of my earnings. Your threats, sir, no longer hold any weight. The only thing left is for everyone to see the truth." The workers leaned in, murmuring among themselves. One by one, they voiced their agreement, presenting their own observations, the improvements, the productivity, the fairness. Harold's facade crumbled before his eyes. You can't," Harold stammered, rage giving way to helplessness. Elias, standing behind Jake, smiled. "Sometimes, those who think they are untouchable are the easiest to expose. Harold, your arrogance blinded you. This yard, these people, they belong to fairness, not fear." For the first time, Harold understood he had lost. His narcissism, his cruelty, and his greed had isolated him. No one respected him, and Jake's careful planning had revealed that power without justice is fragile. Jake turned to the workers. "From now on, we work together. We respect each other, we do what's right, and no one is above accountability, not even Harold." Harold, defeated and silent, retreated to his office. His empire of intimidation had collapsed, and the yard was no longer his playground. Jake, exhausted but triumphant, realized something profound. The chainsaw, the hospital bills, the injustice, they were all catalysts that had revealed his true strength. Elias clapped him on the shoulder. "Well done, Jake. You've earned more than money or respect. You've earned justice." Jake smiled, looking out at Timber Falls. The forest stretched endlessly, quiet and enduring. Life was still unfair, yes, but he had learned to face it, to fight it, and to win. Months later, Timber Falls had returned to its quiet rhythm. The forest stood tall and patient, as if witnessing a story of human courage unfold beneath its branches. Jake sat on the porch of his small cabin, his mother, Margaret, knitting peacefully beside him. "Jake," she said softly, "I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life, and more than that, you showed me that even when the world is cruel, goodness can triumph." Jake smiled, a mixture of pride and humility in his eyes. "Mom, it wasn't just me. Elias helped, and, well, I learned that injustice only wins if you let it. Remember what Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Today, I see that every action we take can make a difference." Across the yard, the workers moved with confidence and respect, now empowered to manage the lumber yard fairly and efficiently. Harold had retreated into isolation, his narcissism exposed, his arrogance no longer a weapon. The tyranny he had relied on had been dismantled, not with violence, but with patience, strategy, and courage. Jake thought of the chainsaw that had broken months ago, a symbol of misfortune that had catalyzed his transformation. What had seemed like injustice had been the beginning of something greater, the awakening of his own strength and the reclamation of his dignity. Elias stood at the edge of the yard, watching quietly. "You've done more than survive," he said. "You've restored balance, Jake. That's the true measure of justice." Jake nodded. The wind rustled through the pines, carrying the promise of new beginnings. He had faced greed, cruelty, and despair, and he had not only endured, he had triumphed. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, Jake whispered to himself, "Sometimes the world is unfair. Sometimes the odds are impossible. But courage, determination, and wisdom, those can turn injustice into victory." And in Timber Falls, the forest stood still, a silent witness to a man who had turned suffering into strength, injustice into justice, and despair into hope. The chainsaw that once symbolized his struggle now rested unused, a reminder of the catalyst that had sparked his journey. The bills, the threats, the oppressive weight of Harold's tyranny, all had been overcome not with force, but with patience, cleverness, and unwavering resolve. Margaret sat beside him, her hands warm and alive, a smile lighting her face. Jake knew that every lesson, every risk, every small act of courage had brought them here. Life remained unpredictable, and injustice would never vanish entirely, but he had discovered the power of action, of standing tall even when the odds seemed impossible. Elias, watching from the edge of the yard, nodded silently. "The battle may never truly end," he murmured, "but the triumphs you've earned will echo far beyond Timber Falls." Jake breathed in the crisp mountain air, feeling the strength of the forest and the people he loved behind him. He had faced despair, exposed cruelty, and forged justice from chaos. And now, at last, he could rest, knowing that courage, wisdom, and perseverance had prevailed. The forest whispered around him, timeless and enduring, as a man and his family began a new chapter, stronger and freer than ever before.